All right, folks. So this is 18-4 and 18-5. We're doing both of them in one fell swoop. Hopefully, it's not too long a recording. So thyroid gland and parathyroid gland. That's what we're talking about here. Now, some of this stuff is lab stuff, so I won't be going through every little bit of it because I don't want to go through what we've already covered in lab. So here's the thyroid gland right here. See it right here. It's right below the thyroid cartilage, your Adam's apple. This is your Adam's apple of your throat, and the thyroid gland is right below it. What else can I tell you about the thyroid gland? Two hormones are made from the thyroid gland. Well, actually three, if you want to think of it as the thyroid hormone being T3 and T4. So the hormones made here are primarily T4, but also T3, tetraiodothyronine. Whoops, I'm sorry, tetraiodothyronine, and triiodothyronine. So T4 is tetraiodothyronine and T3 is triiodothyronine. And the other hormone is calcitonin. And calcitonin is made by the C cells of the thyroid gland. And the C cells are also called interstitial cells. So this is a C cell. C cells make calcitonin. C for calcitonin. And then what cells make thyroid hormone? These follicular cells. Oh, by the way, the C cells are also called parafollicular cells. So C cells have a couple names. Parafollicular, because they are next to the follicular cells, parafollicular cells. You can see that these C cells here are next to the follicular cells. These C cells make calcitonin, and then these follicular cells right here, I'm trying to be careful how I draw so I stay in the follicular cells. These follicular cells make T3 and T4. They make the T3 and T4 and put it into this colloid of the follicle. So these follicular cells encase this follicle, and they store the T3, T4 in the follicle, and they're actually stored complex to a protein, and the protein is called colloid. So there's colloid in here. And when your body needs some thyroid hormone, the colloid is broken down and the T3, T4 is released. So T3 and T4 is made by follicular cells, and calcitonin is made by parafollicular cells.
The thyroid gland is the largest endocrine gland, located in the neck inferior to the larynx and anterior to the trachea. This butterfly-shaped gland has left and right lobes connected by a narrow band of thyroid tissue called the isthmus. The thyroid gland is highly vascular, giving it a reddish color. Blood reaches the thyroid via superior and inferior thyroid arteries. Superior, middle, and inferior thyroid veins carry thyroid hormones from the gland. Beneath the fibrous capsule, the thyroid gland is composed of spherical structures called thyroid follicles. The follicle wall is a simple cuboidal epithelium of follicular cells that surround a central lumen. The follicle lumen is filled with a viscous colloid that contains a glycoprotein called thyroglobulin. Capillaries and parafollicular cells are located in the loose connective tissue between thyroid follicles. Parafollicular cells, also called C cells, secrete the hormone calcitonin, which is involved in regulating calcium levels in body fluids. Calcitonin is the antagonist to parathyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone, or TH, is a general term that encompasses two specific hormones: triiodothyronine, known as T3, and tetraiodothyronine, known as T4, or thyroxine. Thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH, from the anterior pituitary maintains TH synthesis and secretion. In the first phase of TH production, follicular cells secrete thyroglobulin, which contains numerous tyrosine amino acids, into the follicle lumen. Iodide molecules, I negative, from the blood cross the follicular cell and enter the lumen where they're converted to iodine, I. The tyrosine molecules within the thyroglobulin combine with iodine to form iodinated thyroglobulin, which can be stored in the follicle lumen for 2 to 3 months. In the second phase, follicular cells absorb iodinated thyroglobulin by endocytosis and lysosomal enzymes hydrolyze the thyroglobulin to produce T3 and T4, which are secreted into the bloodstream. The primary effect of TH is to maintain normal cellular metabolic activity. In children, TH is especially important for the growth and development of many tissues through stimulation of the pituitary gland to release growth hormone. Excess production of TH, hyperthyroidism, causes increased metabolic rate, which can lead to weight loss, hyperactivity, heat intolerance, and goiter, or enlargement of the thyroid. Insufficient TH production, hypothyroidism, results in low metabolic rate and resultant weight gain, sluggishness, and sensitivity to cold temperatures.
All right, folks, that's the thyroid hormone in a nutshell. Let's look at the mechanism of the thyroxine action. Thyroxine is T4. So before I play the video, just let me warn you that really T3 is the thyroid hormone that is active. Now I keep saying T4, T4, T4. Why T4? Because more T4 is made in the thyroid gland than T3. Some T3 is made and goes to the cells. But all of the T4, when it hits its target cell, is converted to T3. And I don't even know this video is going to show you that. But that's the case. T4 is going to be converted to T3 upon hitting its target cell. Now, let me remind you about something. Thyroxine, T4, and T3 are amino acid derivatives. They're a derivative of tyrosine. But they are an exception to the rule that most amino acid derivative hormones are water soluble. T4 and T3 are not. They're lipophilic. And they act like lipophilic hormones in that they enter the cell and bind intracellular receptors, or also sometimes known as nuclear receptors. All right, so here we go.
Thyroxine is a water-insoluble hormone that is brought to the target cell via a protein carrier. Because it is lipophilic, thyroxine can easily pass through the cell membrane. Thyroxine contains 4 iodines and is often abbreviated T4, tetraiodothyronine. The thyroid gland also secretes smaller amounts of a similar molecule that has only 3 iodines, called triiodothyronine, T3. Both hormones enter target cells, but all the T4 that enters is converted into T3. Thus, only the T3 form of the hormone enters the nucleus and binds to nuclear receptor proteins. The hormone receptor protein complex, in turn, binds to the appropriate hormone response elements on DNA. The binding of the hormone receptor complex has a direct effect on the level of transcription at the site where it binds. The messenger RNA, mRNA, produced then codes for specific proteins.
All right, so that's T3. Now, T3 is an integrative and a permissive hormone. And what that means is, what permissive means is T3, the result of T3 allows other hormones to have greater activity, I guess is the right word. I guess you could say greater activity. So that's the definition of permissive, where one hormone enhances the activity of another hormone. The classic example of thyroxine and T4 and T3 being permissive is epinephrine is nowhere near as efficient, or it doesn't elicit the same response unless T4 or T3, and as you know now, it's all converted to T3 in the target cell anyway, unless T3 is present. The epinephrine receptors aren't there. There's not as many of them anyway, unless T3 is at a normal level. So if you're hypothyroid, then your response to epinephrine is drastically reduced. So that's a permissive effect of T3. Now, T3 also is a long-term response to cold weather. And we call this acclimatization. So if I were to drop you off in the Arctic Circle, initially you'd be shivering because you're cold right now and your muscles are contracting, shivering to produce heat. But if I came to visit you 3 weeks later, you likely would have shed your jacket and be working outside and not be shivering. And the reason for that is you will have increased your amount of T4 and T3 that you make, and you're generating more heat without shivering. So it's non-shivering thermogenesis. By the way, that's exactly what we call it, non-shivering thermogenesis, because you turned on more T4 and T3, and now we're generating more heat. So permissive and integrative, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now this is the details of how you make this. All right, so what happens is this. Well, let's start with number one. Here's your blood. From your blood, you have iodide in your diet, and of course, all of our salt is iodinated. So the American diet has no issues with iodine. We get lots of it because we get lots of table salt, and it's all iodinated. So our thyroid gland, the follicle cells specifically, they absorb the iodine. And here's the iodine pump right there. Iodine is now in here. The iodine attaches to a protein called thyroglobulin right there. Now, this thyroglobulin is a protein rich in tyrosine. This is actually the amino acid from which T3 and T4 is derived. So the iodine is attached to the tyrosine, and the tyrosine is found in this thyroglobulin. Now, this thyroglobulin is stored inside the follicle. So this is in the follicle. All right. Now, upon signal, that typically means TSH from the pituitary. Upon the signal, when the follicular cells want to secrete this T3 and T4, here's what happens. Our follicular cells endocytosize the thyroglobulin. Here's endocytosis. A lysosome fuses, and it's going to break down that protein. And it's going to break it down and release T4 and T3. And now this T4 and T3 can diffuse into the bloodstream. But it's lipophilic. So this T4 and T3 has to be carried by a blood plasma protein. Well, what blood plasma proteins carry T4 and T3? Thyrobinding globulin, TBG, thyrobinding globulin, another hormone called transthyretin, and even the most abundant protein in your blood, albumin. So albumin is the most abundant protein in your plasma, and that carries thyroid hormone for us. So thyrobinding globulin, transthyretin, and albumin all carry thyroid hormone for us. And remember, this is all from the TSH. The anterior lobe secretes TSH, and that tells the thyroid gland to release the T3 and T4. So this is the axis. All right. This is the effects of thyroid hormones on peripheral tissues. Thyroid hormones affect just about every cell in your body. It's one of the few it's the only hormone that has such a ubiquitous, widespread effect. It affects almost every cell in your body. It has a calorogenic effect, so it increases your metabolism. You have to burn more calories in a day with higher levels of thyroid. And here's the big thing I want you to walk away with. Hyperthyroidism is incompatible with life. Now, that doesn't mean you die immediately. I mean, you definitely have time to get treatment. But you can't live with it for long periods of time. It'll kill you. Hyperthyroidism will kill you. But hypothyroidism won't kill you. It has side effects, like you gain weight and you're sluggish and you're cold intolerant, but it won't kill you. So one of the treatments for hyperthyroidism is to ablate the thyroid. Ablate it, kill it. So that's one of the treatments. And how we do that is we actually give it radioactive iodine. Now let me go back. Well, that's just one way. There's lots of ways. There's several ways you can ablate it. The follicle cells of the thyroid gland sequester iodine. When you have iodine in your blood, it all goes into the follicle cells of the thyroid. Well, if you give your body radioactive iodine, well, that's one way we can actually image the follicle cells. But if if you give your body a high concentration of radioactive iodine, that radioactive iodine will be sequestered by the follicular cells, and it'll kill these cells. So now you're not making thyroid hormone because these cells are dead. Well, if you're hyperthyroidism, that's one way to get rid of these cells that make too much T3 and T4, because hyperthyroidism is incompatible with life, whereas hypothyroidism has side effects, but you can live with it. And you can see the rest of the effects of thyroid on here. You just read down through these. All right, so that's the thyroid gland. This is the C cells of the thyroid gland and the homeostatic control. We did this in Bio 203, but I'll run through it again briefly here. If you're eukαλemic, that means you have a blood calcium level of 9 to 11 milligrams per deciliter. That's normal. You're happy. But if your calcium levels go up, what you want to do is you want your C cells to secrete calcitonin. Calcitonin indirectly turns on osteoblasts. And what the osteoblasts do is they take the calcium out of your blood and they add it to bone. Osteoblasts help build bone. So osteoblasts lower blood calcium. Well, that's a good thing, because this whole thing started because you had hypercalcemia. Now you bring your calcium back to normal. But what happens if you have hypocalcemia, your calcium levels dropping? Well, then these glands on the back of the thyroid, these are called parathyroid glands. These parathyroid glands secrete a hormone called PTH, parathyroid hormone. And these guys turn on osteoclasts. And let me remind you from Bio 203, osteoclasts break down bone. And when they break down the bone, they release the calcium to the bloodstream, and it brings your calcium level back up to normal. So this is the calcitonin parathyroid hormone homeostatic mechanism. Calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are antagonistic to each other. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium and PTH raises blood calcium. They are antagonistic. All right, so that's the C cells and calcitonin. Now, we actually already just talked about the parathyroid gland. On the back of the thyroid gland, there's parathyroid glands. You cannot live without your parathyroid glands. You can live without your thyroid, as we just said, but you cannot live without your parathyroid glands, because it helps to keep your blood calcium at a normal level, and your heart needs that to keep beating. It needs proper blood calcium levels. So you can't live without these glands. What these glands do is they turn on osteoclasts. All right, that's what they do. Stimulate osteoclasts, and they inhibit osteoblasts. This is called osteoclastogenesis. There's a really cool rank L story. Whoops. I don't know what happened there. What happened is I can't spell. It stands for receptor activator of nuclear kappa. So receptor activator of nuclear kappa ligand. The ligand, rank L, binds the rank and turns on osteoclasts. So pretty cool little story right here. And we have drugs that affect that binding right there. But osteoclastogenesis is induced by PTH. What PTH does is it increases the amount of rank L binding to rank, which causes osteoclastogenesis. All right. Now there is another part of this story. PTH also goes to the kidneys. Right here and right here. And PTH turns on the 1-alpha hydroxylase enzyme. You're going to say, what the heck is that? Well, if you remember from Bio 203, actually I have a slide I'll show you when I get there, so I won't talk to it till I get to the slide. So first of all, PTH goes to the kidney and it says reabsorb calcium. So now you're not urinating out calcium, it stays in your bloodstream. Good, because the reason why you secreted PTH anyway is because calcium was too low. And I guess I will talk a little bit about number 3. And it also turns on an enzyme that finishes the vitamin D synthesis. I'll talk about how vitamin D starts in the skin when sunlight hits it, but it's finished in the kidneys, and PTH turns on the enzyme that finishes it. And then what the vitamin D does, vitamin D is called calcitriol. What vitamin D does is it goes to your intestines and says absorb the calcium that's been eaten. Because you could drink a lot of milk but not absorb that calcium, but in the presence of vitamin D, you do absorb that calcium. So these are the effects of PTH for raising blood calcium.
The small parathyroid glands are located on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. There are usually 4 parathyroid glands, although the number varies between 2 and 6. They are supplied by the inferior thyroid arteries. Parathyroid glands are composed of 2 cell types, chief cells, or principal cells, which synthesize parathyroid hormone, and oxyphil cells, whose function is unknown. Parathyroid hormone, or PTH, is secreted in response to low blood calcium levels. PTH raises calcium levels in several ways. It promotes resorption of calcium from bone tissue. It increases resorption of calcium in the kidneys, so it is not excreted in urine. And it stimulates synthesis in the kidney of the hormone calcitriol, the active form of vitamin D, which increases calcium absorption from the small intestine. Excess PTH secretion, hyperparathyroidism, may lead to bone fractures due to reduced calcium, kidney stones, psychological changes such as depression, muscular weakness, or even cardiac arrest if blood calcium levels are too high. Inadvertent removal of the parathyroid glands during surgery of the thyroid gland is the most common cause of hypoparathyroidism. The lack of PTH causes low blood calcium levels, which can lead to neuromuscular symptoms such as tingling in the fingers and limbs, muscle cramps, cardiac arrhythmia, and tetany, which may result in death by asphyxiation.
So you can see there the hypoparathyroidism is pretty incompatible with life. I mean, you don't actually both of them are pretty bad. How we found out about the parathyroids, just a real quick story, is back in the day, how we did endocrine studies was we would put to sleep an animal like a dog or a cat or something like that. So we knocked out a dog and we took its thyroid out and then we sewed it back up and then we brought it. We woke it up and watched it for weeks. And every time we did this, the dog died. Until this one time, this endocrinologist put the dog asleep, was cutting out the thyroid glands, and noticed these little brown nodules on the back of the thyroid glands. And he said, I'll leave them in. And he cut around these little brown nodules that happened to be parathyroid glands. So he took out the thyroid, but he left the parathyroid glands in there, and the dog didn't die. Now, it gained a lot of weight, and it became cold intolerant and sluggish and all that. So it suffered from hypothyroidism, but we left the parathyroids in, and it lived. So the parathyroid glands are necessary for life. And being hyper or hypoparathyroid is a bad thing, and the bad thing you can see here is a heart attack. It's all due to calcium imbalance. You can see the cardiac arrest right here, and you can see the cardiac arrhythmia right here. So you need calcium for your heart to contract normally, and obviously the parathyroid hormone is involved in calcium homeostasis. And this is a big homeostatic mechanism that you see here, and we've already actually talked through this once. If your calcium goes up, you secrete calcitonin. If your calcium goes down, you secrete parathyroid hormone. Make sure you're familiar with this and the antagonistic effects of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone.